So this is a bit awkward. I'm technically unemployed. G'day guys, it's Kenny from Delivered Concepts, and no, that thumbnail was not clickbait. Back in December, I decided to resign from my full-time job, and after taking a little bit of time to get back on my feet and recharge, I am now going full-time into Delivered Concepts, doing automotive and residential construction work. So keep an eye out very soon. We'll be opening up bookings for the business. I say we, but it's actually only me. And yeah, look forward to seeing what I can do to help you deliver your concepts into reality. On to today's video. Today's video didn't quite pan out as well as I'd hoped. I'm going to have to do a lot of voiceover recording because I didn't realize that my mic had gone flat. Today I've cut out the lower section of the passenger side rail in preparation for making clearance for the notched rails to fit the chassis. You'll see me show a couple of different techniques, trying to mark out different ways that I can try and remove as much material as possible without damaging the base rails. Unfortunately, my sander decided to hand grenade, so not real impressed with Mr. Makita at the moment. Definitely looking at becoming a red communist, but that's cool. We'll see if I can fix it overnight. Shouldn't have to fix that sander, it's not even 2 years old. Anyway, join me for the video, and I didn't get as much done as I was hoping because I destroyed my sander, and I apologise for the voiceover. I'll recharge the mic, and I'll see you in the comments. Okay, step one, I have to mark out the frame ready for notching. As you can see, this is the black markers where the original frame rails now come up to, and this is the hard line of the top of the chassis with the diff sitting underneath. So to create the clearance that I need and to house the custom piece, I'm actually going to be removing this entire bottom rail. Worth noting that all three of the original style factory mounts have to be removed. These two now no longer exist, and that's why I decided to do a curved chassis rail to give the strength. The front one needs to be reworked, and the back mount's the only mount that stays original. What I'll do now is I'll switch to hyperlapse, and you'll see how I mark it out, and we can progress from there. I thought I'd share a little bit of a pro tip that I learned a few years ago on how to make things a bit easier, especially if you've got eyes like mine that are aging badly. If you grab yourself just a standard Nico pen from Officeworks or any of your local office supplies and colour in the area that you want to mark, what will happen is you'll have a direct contrast between the line that you scribe and the actual colour, which makes it far easier to see. So if I go like this now, I've got a nice crisp line that I can actually use, and you can see the contrast between the blue and the scraped metal. So you might have noticed I was struggling down on this bottom corner to get a good clean scribe mark. My combination square doesn't fit in, so at the moment I've got a couple of random marks that aren't very clean and precise. So what I've managed to do is I've got a long reach square, one of the Legest squares that I used to sell. By coming down from the top of the frame, I've got all the clearance in the world. I've still got a parallel surface. Pinch the square on top, and a good crisp, clean scribe mark, ready for cutting. Now that all the cut points are all marked out, I'm going to switch over to a multi-tool and a grinder, combination of probably also a saber saw. What I've got to go through and do is actually start cutting out all of these top sections to release the frame from the lower. I'll go through and unbolt the frame off the jig table. A little bit hard to see, but if you notice in the background, I've actually got these black straps that are in place. So they are welded to the frame and welded to the tub frame. So that way then, as I remove the material, everything's going to be held parallel in its original shape. Bit of a painful job sneaking up on it nice and steady, but I don't want to take away any of the base material from the main frame rails that stay. Anyway, let's keep getting into it. Here we go, last part of the final cut.
By using a combination of the multi-tool, grinder and saber saw, I've been able to remove the RHS frame. You'll notice that there's a little bit of polished marks on the bottom of the frame, but I haven't gouged into it and therefore haven't removed any of its structural strength. I can catch the old frame a little bit with my fingernail, but that's easily removed with the disc sander. So after finish removing the last of the RHS with the disc sander, I just got to address the corner. The corner's got a very slight bump in it from where the old material was welded on. I'm going to grab a file down the high spots, just check the radius of the corner, and then move on. So now that I've run both the file and both sanders over it, you get to see the finished product. By taking your time and removing material slowly, you can get a fantastic finish. You don't gouge into the base material. What's worth noting is there's two tiny little low spots in the middle of the frame from where the original material was welded. I must have got a little bit of undercut on my previous weld. They won't be seen in the final product as the notch frame cover covers them up once it's all welded back in. So following the same process as the previous weld joint, grab the 2-inch sander, knock down the bulk of the material, get it back to flush. Be very careful not to gouge into the original material. Then switch over to a file to chase the high spots and make sure the corner radiuses look clean and crisp. These particular ones at either end will be seen. Then switch to using the orbital sander. You'll notice that out of frustration, the orbital sander dies right at the end of this video clip, and then I spend the next couple of hours trying to fix it. So I'll speed this section up to save boring you, but what I end up having to do here is switch over to using a Dremel. It's not ideal to use such an underpowered tool to do the job, but it's one of the things that gives me the best access. I come up from underneath, cutting through the original welds that I'd put in and removing the little triangle piece. Then I switch over to using the multi-tool just to finish the cut off, then followed by the sander, clean up the edges, chase the last little bit of overhang, then a quick clean up ready for welding. On to the next stage. All of the frame has now been removed. I've gone through and dressed up all of the bottom of the original frame rails. There's a little bit of damage underneath the frame rails that is off camera, so when I flip the tub over for final welding, I'll address that and pull that back out. Look, the reality is most people won't notice, but I like to turn out a high quality product. What I'm going to do now is lift in the original timber buck. Now, the reason why the buck goes back in is the buck has a known distance down the bottom corner that was set off where the original chassis mount was. It also has a known distance at the other end where it lines up with where the original headboard is meant to be, and therefore it was cut to exact length. What I've got to do here is there's a center line mark on the buck that I created way back when I first put it together, and I've got to transfer that onto the tub. So I will gently lift it up, trying to make sure that it's got rearward pressure to push against the rear rail, but also make sure that it sits flush against the back stop blocks, because that's the design of the buck to make sure that the measurements can be used. So just sneak up on that, little bit of a gap, so I'll just adjust that. There it is. It's nice and tight against the housing. Cinch that one up. Righto, so now we got our center mark. Just grab a square, come down on top of the rail, line up the square. Good clean scribe mark. And that is the center of our tub. Now, like I showed in a previous section of the video, it's a little bit hard to see that line, so I'll just black it out with some Nico pen where it's on bare metal. Scribe it back in again. There we go. Nice, clean, consistent line. I can remove the timber buck and put in the steel piece. So unfortunately I jumped ahead a little bit because I had my hands preoccupied when I loaded the steel insert. A couple of things to note. When I put the steel insert in, I made sure that the top of the insert was dead flat, and that way then when I clamped it up, it didn't try to distort the RHS on top. I've got a couple of wedge blocks in here just to save from distorting, because we must remember this is only 1.6mm thick steel. It's about the depth that gives us its strength rather than its actual thickness. What I've gone through and done now is I've gone through and flushed up these ends ready for tack welding. I've used some sash clamps to go to the other side of the frame and just pull the notch section into alignment. Although the level is clamped on at the moment, it's actually quite loose, and I can slip a piece of paper in at each end for a little bit of clearance. What I'm going to go through and do now is I'm going to switch over and start to tack some of this in.
Very important that I get this tacked in the position where it wants to go, because down on the bottom of these two notch legs, it's absolutely critical that they stay in the right orientation so that when they hit either end, they line up with the marks. I don't want something that's wavy, because I think eventually there'll be a flat sheet metal piece that gets put on the front, and that's just going to make more work for me in the future. Now that the notch section's all tacked in, I can go through and check my clearances with my piece of paper again. Adjust the clamps if I need to. Aiming for just a slight pinch fit on the paper. There it is. Don't want it actually tearing the paper out. Come around and check the other end. A little bit tight on this one, so I'll just back it off. And there we go. Ready to move on to the next stage, where we cut the front and rear sections of the rails. So moving on to fitting the front rail, I've gone through and I've cut a piece of RHS to fit in the front section here, which I'll just load in like so. And already I can notice from loading it in that there's actually a gap in the miter cut here where the notch is not cut completely square, even though the RHS is. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to scribe those two. I don't want that type of level of gap in between the two. There's a couple of different ways I can do it. What I'm actually going to do is clamp it in position, use the saber saw to come down, use the thickness of the blade and the kerf to take that all the way through. That way then I can get the material on the bottom. I've also added a clamp, which you can barely see. Apologise, really bad North Queensland storm in the background. I've added a clamp on top and a pushing block to stop it from crushing the metal, to drive the base of the notch down to the base of the frame. Sorry, it's very important that that dimension stays the same, because it's at this point where the chassis continues parallel on the actual vehicle. But easy enough to fix. We'll move on to cutting it. So I apologise about the thundering rain in the background, but one of the things I noticed when I was bringing up this piece of RHS is somewhere along the line, the notch section has actually shrunk a little bit, and you'll notice it's just a very, very small gap. It's around about 1.5 mm, which is the material thickness. It's hard on the bottom of the frame, and so is the actual notch itself, but I've noticed that it's come back up here. What I'm going to do now is I've got a hydraulic porta power that I'm actually going to come in with a pair of scissor jaws and then go inside and actually try and stretch that notch back up. I intentionally left the return on this part of the flange a little bit long, so that if I needed to, I could always put a couple of slot cuts in here, pull this up, it'd blend into the radius, you'd never actually tell visually, and then I can just weld that cut back in. I'll switch over now and we'll get it sorted. So even though I've managed to stretch it quite a fair bit with the scissor jaws, I'm actually not happy with the fitment. You might have noticed in the last section of this hyperlapse, it actually started to create a bit of a ducktail on the end of this, where this was stretching more than what this center section was. So the last thing I want to do is actually have a very noticeable like kick up on the bottom of the frame rails. So I'm going to switch over and cut these like I originally planned to. That way then I can lift this section up, and then I'll just fill in the gap with some weld. Righto, as you can see, without a lot of effort, yeah, I have got a little bit of a gap here that I can close up, but nothing I can't close with a bit of filler rod. I've got the RHS down hard on the chassis table. I've got it to where the lip is just a little bit higher. Now, the reason why I've done that is I can actually dolly that down into position. So I'll get this piece here cut to length and get the 45 on the other end. Then I'll come back through, I'll clamp everything back in position. I shall tack the bottom. I'll probably tack this face here just to make sure that this face here is smooth with that face. So I can work that in and out with a screwdriver.
I'll go around and do the other side, and then the last part that I'll actually tack will be these two top corners here and this one over here, and then I can actually blend this top piece in. At this point, it's very, very easy to hammer and dolly this piece, just hammer, they can't get a dolly inside, hammer that piece down. Once that piece is hammered into position and this is welded out, then I will go through and I'll use some lay wire technique, and I'll actually fill in that slot, metal finish it out, you'll never know that it was there, and it'll still retain its strength. Then on the other end, I've got to go and cut a 45-degree piece to match up with the original headboard of the rails. So I'll switch to doing that. Okay, I'm back with the piece now. It's been cut on the miter, and I've done a little bit of extra work to it in preparation for the next stage. What I've done is, this is actually the pocket that you use to get in and secure the bolt when it's actually fitted to the vehicle. Now, this might look like a bit of a strange shape, but part of my thinking is I actually have to weld across this miter to the piece that goes up in here. So in order to do that, when you get to this corner here, there's no material to hold the weld, and the weld wants to sink out and fall away. So what I've done is I've left this little strip of land or material in there. I can carry my weld across to this piece, carry it from the bottom up to that piece, reach in later with the die grinder and cut that section out. What I also did is I cut the slot in the bottom to take the bolt. On this chassis table, there's actually a scribe mark in here which correlates with the threaded hole that's in the top of the chassis table. So it allows me to check my fitment. So if we put it all back in position, line it up where it's supposed to go, should be able to take this 12mm bolt and slot it straight in. Now I am going to have to spend a fair bit of time lining up, putting the level back on it like you've seen previously, and getting all the alignment dialed in. So for now, this is just a test fitting to make sure the hole's in the right position, make sure that the length is good. I'll just nip this up so we can check for the position. Being that this is actually going to be one of the only 4 mounting points, it's very important that I get this in the right position. Okay, so I've got it finger tight. I'm coming up to this end. Yep, that's in the right position. Come down to this end. Check the headboard length, make sure there's plenty of clearance, and there is. Check the side clearance. Got to come over just a little bit. Nearly. There we go. Check down this end, make sure we haven't moved down that end. Check again. And as I said, although I'm doing it all now, setting it up, I'm going to have to check it all again with the level before I go to weld. Check the end plate. Perfect. Lock it off with the bolt. The next step after doing this is I've got to cut this piece here to do the joint in between. Then I can finish prepping this piece, and then I've just got to prep the joint on that piece. Then I can start tacking it all in, get it square, and then we'll move on to the back. Jumped ahead as I had to put a lot of clamps and a lot of bracketry in to hold this piece in together. As you can see, I've kind of got it tacked in now. At the moment, I'm just working over the edges. I've got to bring some of the low spots up and get some of the high spots back down, but as you can see, it's a nice clean fit. I've checked the front edge for square, I've checked the back edge and the front face for square, so other than a tiny little low spot there, which I'll bring up, it's actually starting to look pretty good. Once I finish welding, then I'll go through and cut this pocket out so it matches the other side. I did jump ahead, and I apologise again, I didn't mean to, but I'm just having dramas trying to record. So hot in the shed at the moment that I forget to turn the camera and the microphones on. Here we are. There was a joint here, you can see the start of it. I've got to take the clamp off and finish it, but I've actually now gone through and completely TIG welded that and metal finished it. A couple of little low spots in there which I'll just pick up, but all in all, nice smooth transition and finish. Funnily enough, in the workday, the Makita sander drama from earlier in the video. So what happened is
The grub screw on the inside that holds the base plate to the motor has stripped out. I did a bit of a naughty thing and I put a helicoil in there, but the first one flogged out, so then I put a second one in there, drowned it all in Loctite trying to fix it, but you should not be able to grab your sander and do that. So it should move at some point. So unfortunately, the sander's toast again, and I do tend to use this sander a lot for metal finishing. Definitely shouldn't free spin. So that's probably going to end today's video. I've got a ton of repairs to do on this thing, plus I'll chase a little bit of the metalwork on the frame rails. To give you a bit of an idea on where we finished the darted, we've got the front rails now tacked in pretty close. The bolt goes back in. The center section's all tacked in on both sides, and tomorrow we shall work on the back section, finish it off, and over the next day or day and a half I'll do the rest of the metal finishing. Cool, guys. Thanks for checking out the video. If you like the content, welcome to any feedback that you've got, and I shall see you next time. And get a good crisp scribe line. Don't do that, though. Don't try and knock your square off. Things you catch on camera. A useful thing to... Fucking hell. English today, not much.